One of the first questions that the search committee asked me when during our first interview on the phone was, what is your understanding of worship? Just recently, the committee, as well as the consistory and some other individuals, have asked me to repeat that answer for you this morning as a segue for our discussion later on in Reverend Hall, which I agree with Bob. It's extremely important to have this conversation and others in order for us to move forward into the history of our, not only the history of our church, but the future of our church as well. The passage that Edwina had read just a little bit earlier is the story of Pentecost. Pentecost, for lack of a better phrase, is the birthday of the church, complete with cakes and candles and all that other stuff. It's the day when the disciples who had abandoned Jesus on the cross gathered together and tried to figure out what they were going to do without their leader, without their inspiration, without their hope, without their guidance. And as they gathered together, they shared their anxieties and their fears. They shared their promises and their hopes. They shared their concern and joy and love for one another, as well as some of the sadness that they felt over the loss of Jesus and some of the other disciples. And they became something that few people expected. They received the Holy Spirit like a rushing wind, and they became a family. They became a community of brothers and sisters. And originally, they weren't called the church. Originally, they were called the followers of the way. In other words, they were the followers of the example of Jesus in his life in their own lives. I'm going to say that again. They were followers of the example of Jesus in his life in their own lives. And so they pushed themselves outside of the doors of the room that they were meeting in, and they went into the world, often with a great deal of fear, because they were being persecuted. And they went out and they represented Christ in their own time, in their own place, among their own people, and then farther and farther to others. Now, what they did when they gathered was to celebrate their life together. Back in 1994, I went to my very first meeting of CSOL, which is the International Christian Solidarity for Human Rights in Latin America in Mexico City. And when I got there, the Zapatista Revolution had taken place down in the southern part of Mexico, and the country as a whole was under a lot of tension. There were military convoys and armed forces all over the country of Mexico at the time, including Mexico City. And on the first day that I got there, a priest picked me up. I was the only Protestant in the whole group. And a priest picked me up, Father Pedro, and he said, "Would you like to go to a mass?" I said, "Oh, yeah, that'd be cute. That'd be sort of fun. I haven't done that in a while. Yeah, I'd like to go to mass." And he goes, "Well, then be here at 3 o'clock and we'll pick you up and take you to the mass." And so when they picked me up, they got me in the car and we drove to this compound. And it was a walled area of about 10 square blocks in this poorest part of Mexico City. And inside of it, there were 4 churches. One had been built in 1525, first one. Now think about that. I think this church was built in 1815. This congregation gathered in 1850. That's almost 300 years earlier. And then the next one had been built in 1640, and the next one had been built in 1780, and then finally the last one had been built in the 19th century, 1800s. And they asked me if I would like to participate in the service. And I said, yeah, that'd be fun. That'd be sort of neat. And so we went into the newest cathedral, quote unquote, and we gathered there. They didn't know what to do with me because I wasn't a priest, I wasn't a deacon, I wasn't a bishop, and I certainly wasn't a nun. And so finally they figured out what to do. They threw some robes on me, and they said, It's going to begin in a few minutes, this mass of ours. Oh, that's cool. That's great. The very first thing I heard was this huge explosion. I don't know, my goodness, what have I got myself into? And then I heard another explosion, and then four and five at the same time. And the doors of this cathedral opened up, and the 30 of us walked out as a group. I go, oh my goodness. And you know what the explosion was? It was fireworks. They were shooting fireworks off into the air. And as we walked towards the stage that they had built as the altar area, there were 4,000 of Mexico City's poorest people gathered. And they were all singing a song, Un pueblo unido jamás será vencido. People together will never be defeated. Un pueblo unido jamás será vencido. And so we went walking through this crowd, and everybody got up and hugged one another, and hugged us, and gave us kisses, and threw flowers. And they passed food around, and they passed drink around. And they were in a full celebration of life itself. And the fireworks just kept going. Boom, 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 boom. It was all a huge celebration that God was in our midst, that the God of love was being proclaimed, and the world was going to be a new place. A family of God's people. Back to the question that the search committee asked me so long ago. What is worship? Somewhere along the lines, we got the idea that going to church was a Sunday thing, that was a responsibility, a duty, something that we have done all our lives, so we still have to do it because, well, it's part of what we do. Some of us think, like my brother explained so long ago, that we go to church on Sunday so we can get our hands stamped. And then when we go to the pearly gates and St. Peter greets us, he looks in the book and says, well, you got a lot of stamps on your hand. You must be okay. Is that worship? No. Worship is the celebration of what we have been doing, what we are, what we have been the 6 days before that. Working in the vineyards of this world with love, hope, with kindness and mercy, bringing a little bit more of God's presence into the world, of God's love into the world. And when we get to Sunday, we celebrate with one another what that means. What that really is. And when something happens to one of us, when one of us fades or disappears from this planet, we come together as a family, as a community, to celebrate that person's life because they were once one of us. We're a support group. We're a family. We're a community centered around Jesus Christ and His example for us each and every day. And so worship is not a responsibility. Worship is an opportunity. And let me say that again. Worship is not a responsibility. It is an opportunity for us to celebrate the great presence of God. Joan and I were in Texas. We lived there for almost 2 years, a little more than 2 years actually. And we were in a town called Floresville. That's Floresville. And we couldn't find a church. But so many of them down there are so conservative and so exclusive. I'll say the word again, exclusive. That we couldn't find a place where we felt like family. And over the course of that 2 years, you know what we started to miss? We started to miss our brothers and sisters. We started to miss our mothers and our fathers. We started to miss our children, our daughters and our sons. That were a part of us as much as anything else was part of us. We miss going to church on Sunday and celebrating our life together. In became an anthem of the church. The song was not just a song, it wasn't just a hymn, it was part of us. And part of our opportunity to celebrate. Now, when I got back from Mexico, the trip I just told you about, it was getting real close to Easter, and I asked the consistory, I said, do you think it'd be possible for us to have fireworks on Easter Sunday? They go, well, that might be a little much like now. But you get the idea. It's a time for us to be together, to be us, to be a family. Those kids are not only their kids, but our kids too. Where we all depend on one another, we comfort one another, we celebrate for one another, we become a part of the family we are. That's what worship is. So it doesn't make any difference whether you call it an altar or a communion table. What's important is this. Because tomorrow, if this building was destroyed, the church would still exist right here. Because we're the church. We're the family. And we're the community of God. Anyone in our thoughts and prayers?